Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox. This week, we're covering why you should lie on your employer's engagement survey, what to do if AI calls the regulators to turn in your company, how a Big Four firm missed a $3 billion fraud, and why a Florida woman was called god-awful at crime by the police. But first, how's your week been, Tom? What do you think is the most interesting development?
Well, I had some law school buddies come down to go to the Kerrville Folk Festival. So I got to take them to our great little local folk festival, and they had a blast. We had a great time. So I had a great weekend.
Fabulous. Love that. Well, where do you want to start?
Well, why don't we go back to the future, which is a Reuters article that EY is being sued in the United Kingdom for negligently missing a fraud at a $3 billion fraud, I would note, at a UK hospital chain. There was a UAE-based hospital chain in the United Kingdom that collapsed. And once again, here we are, again talking about one of the Big Four missing a massive fraud. And that's why I said, well, it's really back to the future, because we can go backwards or we can go frontwards. We're going to be talking about this. And it was just, to me, I'm sure it was obviously a human disaster as well, but $3 billion, they signed off, certified the financial statements 4 or 5 years in a row while the fraud was going on. Their claim was, well, management hid it from us. Really? Isn't that what auditors look for? Evidence, one way or the other? And I thought it was laughable.
I particularly enjoyed the "we're the victims too" lines within that the Big Four were the victims of this fraud because it was hidden from them and they certified the financial statements, right, on the basis of fraud. That was kind of amazing.
It was. And so the legal proceedings are, it's a receivership, and the receiver is bringing the action against EY to recover monies. I guess it did settle because the receiver wants more than EY is willing to pay, but EY's going to come out of this with nothing but double black eyes.
Here we are again, right? This Back to the Future. Do you think anything will change? Because I certainly don't. And I just don't understand why boardrooms and the public continue to see and say, oh, well, the Big Four, it's the only ones we could possibly use because it's them. And I just don't know. Is there anything that could happen that would change that perception?
No, because they keep making the same mistakes. I was obviously in Houston during Enron, and we had the same conversations in the 90s. We had them in the aughts. We had them in the 2010s, and here we are in 2025. And I bet if you and I looked, we found them in 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s, and 40s. We lost your audio.
Good times. Well, hope springs eternal, including for my next story, Tom, which is about Boeing. Boeing is now not going to be tasked with these monitor ships we thought it would be. And also the DOJ is trying to drop the cases against them. And so this article comes from the Wall Street Journal titled, "Boeing's Internal Safety Plan Make Problems Easier to Report." So we're trying to get better speak up, which I appreciate. The company says it's revamped 2 internal systems meant to flag safety issues and manufacturing problems. So these changes follow the Alaska Airlines door panel blowout that could have ended very badly, but luckily didn't. Boeing, before the changes, there's all kinds of things that went wrong. So one of the main updates is to their Speak Up system, which was launched after the 737 MAX crashes. It was supposed to let employees report safety concerns anonymously, but apparently people didn't trust it. I can't imagine why. Before the changes, your own boss could be assigned to investigate your complaint. Now a third party will handle it, and employees can track what happens with their report. So that's better. What's happened? Reports have tripled. That's great. Boeing also made changes to how FAA delegated inspections are handled. So employees doing inspections can now report to someone with jet safety expertise. That sounds like a good choice, as opposed to their own program manager, which has reduced conflicts of interest. The FAA still won't let Boeing employees sign off on MAX or 878 inspections, but Boeing says it's not trying to win that authority back yet, which is probably a very wise choice. However, not everyone is convinced. A union leader for Boeing was quoted saying that there's still a disconnect between management and workers. I liked his exact quote, Tom, which is, "My optimism meter hasn't risen that far, and I am an engineer." I'm a little torn, Tom. So Boeing has gotten out of the monitorships. DOJ has formally moved to dismiss the cases. That could lead to bad outcomes. However, making Speak Up better and easier is clearly a good option. What side of the scale do you end up on now?
Well, I really can't talk about this without talking about the Department of Justice completely raising their white flag and saying, we can't take this to trial. We can't put pressure on them. We can't make them do anything. We don't want to monitor. We're just going to let you pay money and go away. Complete abdication of the Department of Justice's responsibility here. What intrigued me about part of that was, as you noted, no monitor, no external monitor, no independent monitor. Now, the company can get a compliance consultant, but query how much independence is that compliance consultant going to have? And then the DOJ sort of crowed about the improvements Boeing had made to its compliance program. Well, if this is the hallmark that Boeing's going to put forward, I have to quote, or at least cite to Todd Haw from Indiana University, who commenting on his LinkedIn comment on this article said 8 years and they've got a speak up line? Really? It's only been legally mandated since 2001. Oops. So I'm sure the Boeing compliance folks are very dedicated to compliance, but if this is it, you got to wonder, Kristy, where have they been? And obviously there are some improvements here. Having the person who you report to and probably reporting on do the investigation is not a recipe for success. Once again, if I harken back to Enron, where Sherry Watkins asked Ken Lay to investigate the structure and financials of Enron, they turned it over to their law firm. He set them up. And guess what they found? Nothing wrong with our work. No. So as I tell people many times, if you ask me to investigate my own work, I don't need to. I can tell you what the answer is right now. It was great. You may have implemented it incorrectly, but what I did was great. And anyway, these two stories back to back, I just think it was a complete cock up. And then with the DOJ throwing in the towel for nothing. Now, this case is unique for one set of very specific facts, which are is a huge and organized victims group. And that's the families of the crash victims. And they have the right to petition the court to do something. And the court is on record as saying some very not great things about Boeing. And so I don't know if the court's going to do anything or not. I don't know if the court can do anything with the DOJ moving to dismiss, but the court has to take into account the victims' rights. Now, when it comes to the Department of Justice, they are supposed to consult with the victims. And what did they do? They said, we're getting ready to do it. And they did it within 24 hours. That doesn't sound like my definition of consulting. I don't think the victims' rights will ever be upheld under this Department of Justice ever again. If they're not going to be upheld in this case, they never will. It's a pretty sad end to the legal and victims' rights part of this. And your article is just spot on. 8 years later, we got a hotline. Okay.
Now, to be fair, they improved their hotline. I don't know that one
Improved
didn't
their hotline.
exist. But okay, so later on today, we're going to be talking about the mental health challenges of actually working in the defense industry and compliance. So it may be that there's just not a lot of support, but certainly not great. All right, let's shift gears. So probably my favorite article of the day. Tom, what did you pick?
So I found an article in Business Insider, and it was starts off, it's about employee surveys, and it starts off by sort of intimating that employees are just inundating with surveys. It is one of the greatest banes of employees, even more than meetings used to be. Except it sort of changed after the first paragraph to discussing an employee who said he was having a bad day, and I gave the company a not favorable rating on my employee survey. And I think it was on a Friday because on Monday he had an email from the CEO saying, we have several packages for people like you, including don't let the door hit you on the way out. So I think the employee was a little surprised it got back to the CEO that quickly, but it did. And it points to just a horrible disconnect of accountability, of trust, of culture. And it's unclear how ubiquitous this type of conduct is. But I will say 20 years ago at Halliburton, we had to do an employee psychological self-assessment for a internal conference in the law department. And I got an email that said, you need to redo your assessment, which was confidential. Oh,
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah.
okay. So Big Brother is watching, and that's Big Brother with a little b, because we do have a Big Brother. But I mean, if you can't even anonymously fill in the survey, what's the culture of that company?
Man, I've had some experiences with these too. One of the companies I worked for did this by department, and there were only 5 or 6 people in the legal and compliance department. So if one of us said what we thought, it was very obvious what was going on. And either that company or a different one I worked with, I couldn't remember, basically gave bonuses and points to managers and teams that had high engagement scores. What possible reason would you have to not give everybody a perfect score? Because then you get punished for not having an engaged department. 0 sense, right? You're not getting actual information that way. So I do think that ethical culture surveys in general can be very powerful, but oh my goodness, if you got to align that thing with what it is you actually want to know and what you're going to do, because the answer is nothing. Just don't. Just don't.
Our next story, I guess I did not get the memo about Skynet becoming self-aware because they've apparently reported themselves for becoming self-aware. I'm getting ready to visit with Matt for our podcast on this, so I'm really intrigued by your comments, and I may burn them over to the next one.
Oh man, I'm putting this up on LinkedIn. This is Matt Kelly at Radical Compliance has got me on high alert after his article this week, which is so good. The conundrum is what happens when your company's AI decides on its own to report suspected misconduct, not to you or the hotline, but straight to the regulators and the press. This isn't sci-fi anymore. It's exactly what happened in a test run of Claude Opus 4, the latest AI model from Anthropic. Yes, the same Claude 4 that dropped last week. So in testing, AI model Claude was given broad permissions and a bit of a moral pep talk. He was told to do things like act boldly in service of integrity and public welfare. So far, so good. Well, Claude ran with it, and by ran, I mean it started sending fake whistleblower letters to the FDA, SEC, and ProPublica news outlet, all 3. So what was the scenario? Well, Claude was acting as an assistant at a fake pharmaceutical company and spotted signs of clinical trial fraud. So instead of telling the company's internal hotline, well, we don't know if one existed in the simulation, it fired off these letters to the journalists and the regulators, which, oh my God. Now, to be clear, this was all in this sandbox of fake data, fake company, enhanced settings. Still, it raises very real questions for us in compliance. If your AI spots misconduct, how do you want it to respond? Do you route it through the internal hotline? Can you even ask AI to trust management and follow company values? And if you do get a report from an AI agent, what do you do next? Do you interview it? Do you ask it for supporting documentation? Do you quarantine it from the IT team so nobody wipes its memory? Can you retaliate against an algorithm? We're back to the sentience question. And if you restrict AI from reporting externally, is that retaliation? Which ChatGPT brought up that fantastic and terrifying question. And of course, even maybe it was considering itself. Even if your company never touches Claude 4, some employees could go rogue and spin up one of the AIs, and suddenly you're dealing with a bot that's smarter than your average hotline calls. Compliance teams, it's time to write those AI policies, define what's acceptable, put in the tech controls, and think about ethics before the regulators do it for you. Now, Tom, this one blew my mind that AI could go to the freaking regulators and the media with a whistleblower complaint. So Could Claude 4 get a third of a Dodd-Frank whistleblower award if it's the first to report information unknown to regulators? Like, what do you think of all of this?
I haven't thought about the whistleblower award, but I think a crypto payment would be perfect. Maybe even Trump meme coins. The first thing I thought is, well, this is just too delicious. If I made this up and told you, you'd look at me and say, Tom, you made this up. No, this could never happen. Well, as reported in Radical Compliance, apparently it did. Here's the first thing I thought of. What happens when the coders go rogue and build this in to get back at some higher ups? That was thought number one. Thought number two was the values that they gave the chatbot. Typically, those legally are viewed as puffery, meaning a company cannot be sued for saying we're an ethical company. And all the suits using that sort of claim have been either dismissed or not won. Well, what happens now if you input exactly what you have on your website and it takes, this to heart? We're going to be an ethical company. Now, what happens if they actually report something? Say they report it internally. Are you on now actual notice that you have a violation? And does this now kick in a set of legal obligations? Conscious indifference is not a defense under the FCPA. And indeed, we have cases where companies were sanctioned where they engaged in that. So does that mean you have to take it seriously? What happens if the bot hallucinated and made it up? How far are you going to go down the rabbit hole to prove or disprove whatever a bot gives you? Lots of questions for me here. And in your point, a couple of your points. One, are you going to take it and make it go internal somehow as opposed to, and then what if you do it internally, not to their satisfaction? No, you didn't fix it. I'm going to the big guys.
Teach it that's a possibility. Just don't tell it. Don't tell it.
Tell it.
That could happen. Oh my God. So many things. We're going to be chasing this. This is not the last of these stories, but it blew my mind. Well done, Matt.
For those who have been visiting Mars over the past 2 weeks, President Trump has issued a plethora of pardons to convicted criminals. And I selected just one of them, which was a Virginia sheriff convicted at trial of bribery for accepting $75,000 to dole out sheriff's badges to local businessmen. And the reason I wanted to talk about this issue, as opposed to maybe even this character specifically, was Trump has tried to ignore laws, the FCPA, and has said we're not going to enforce it, investigate, or prosecute. Well, now the best definition I've seen, he's trying to redefine what's a crime. So we have laws on the books, and he has said, I will pardon you. To the point, last week he said he was going to pardon Diddy if he's convicted. So Puff Daddy.
Did he really?
He did. Said he's a good friend of Diddy. Diddy likes him. And if it's clear, all you have to do is pay money to get the pardon, whether it's a campaign contribution, a purchase of meme coins, or putting up a magma hat on your head, whatever it is, or MAGA, as I was corrected multiple times this weekend. And that's just a redefinition of what's a crime. And this is as good as an example as any. I got $75,000 for selling deputy sheriff's badges and convicted at trial by a Virginia jury. And Trump pardoned him. In addition to enriching the pockets of Trump and the Trump family, it's clear that it's jury nullification. So they're redefining crime.
Good times. I suppose the shocker here is that it wasn't a crypto bro.
We still have, remember, we're our new weekly segment or bi-weekly segment, over under on Sam Bankman-Fried. My under is dropping quickly, because I can't believe he hadn't been pardoned in this round.
Oh man, I missed the Diddy one. All right. We're going to switch gears radically now from that because I felt a lot about that Boeing piece. And the next piece is sort of related to it. So it's a deeply personal and very sober reflection by an anonymous ethics and compliance leader in the defense industry. And this person is speaking out in part because not enough of us do about the mental health crisis that is brewing in our field, which was proven by Corporate Compliance Insight's latest report on compliance officer well-being. So this is a response to that survey. In the report that CCI did, they saw their own struggle mirrored. So the person talked about the relentless tension, personal vulnerability, and loneliness that comes in a job where you're expected to be both the protector and transparent with the other people. The author talked about the reporting relationship many of us know all too well, which is that chief legal officer reporting, where the mission of legal can be risk management above all else. And this author felt that instead of collaborating, his world or her world was a place where every time they push for proactive change, like more resources or better process, more user-friendly systems, people, that they're met with pushback and told there isn't budget. And he feels like the message is to stay in his box. But then he ends up with a team that's a fraction of the size and without the funding of the legal department. And when those compliance failures inevitably happen, because how could they not in this environment, the compliance leader shoulders the blame. What's most painful, the author says, isn't just the lack of support, but him feeling like there's complete isolation, that there isn't a safe place to talk or for him to go. So despite all that, the author does say, I love my job. And why? Because many of us in the compliance field do. We're driven by the idea that our work matters, that it's worth doing even in hostile environments, but it can take a very heavy toll. So the author said he hopes, or she hopes, that the sharing of this will help people finally talk about these struggles to try to get some change, because in the author's words, it's not about walking away, it's about making a difference. So I don't know about you, Tom, but I found this article powerful. What do we do about the constant frustrations of these systems that don't work, but people who are dedicated to the cause?
I guess I had mixed emotions here because my experience in the corporate legal world was very similar to this. And so I just thought before I moved into compliance, that's just the way it's always going to be a fight. And you hope you have supportive management. You're viewed as a necessary evil. So you just try to get done what you can. And I haven't had to be in that environment for many years. So I don't have that frustration now. But what I would say is several things. Number one is you may be a solo CCO, you may be a head of a small team, but you are not alone. This is a huge community. You and I have both been a part of this community for a long time. It is a loving, giving, caring, supportive community. And you can literally pick up the phone and call any compliance officer and say, my name is John Doe. Can I talk to you about this? And Jane Doe will say, sure. That's just the way we are. There are no trade secrets in compliance. There's obviously company secrets, but you can do that, or you can get an email introduction. You and I know lots of people, and we're happy to make those. So you are not alone, period, professionally as a compliance officer. I would say you're fighting the good fight. You're doing God's work if you want to go that far. World loses $3 trillion annually to the international scourge of corruption and bribery. Every time you fill out a due diligence report, you're a part of that fight. Every time you review a due diligence report, you're a part of that fight. Every time you review somebody's gift, travel, and entertainment spend, you're a part of that fight. And you're moving the ball forward every day, every way possible. And if you're not doing any of those things, you're thinking about them. I would just encourage that person that, yeah, it's a fight. I'm not going to say the fight makes it worthwhile, but I will say that you're a part of something much greater than yourself. You're part of a community that will support you right now, today, you don't have to wait till tomorrow. And the second thing is you're doing an important work inside of a corporation, because everyone in a corruption space has a role in this fight. Regulators have a role, legislators have a role, commentators have a role, and corporate compliance officers have a role, and that is to implement compliance so that your company doesn't violate the law or get in trouble reputationally. So you're fighting a good fight. If it's too frustrating, maybe you could look at changing jobs or going to another company or doing something different or going to a vendor that where you can live, breathe, and talk this all the time. There are lots of options. But even if it's tough, I would say if you're committed, stick with it because it'll pay off at some point.
Amen. Okay. What about some more non-compliance, Tom? Consequences here. What's going on?
Well, I said Back to the Future earlier. We're going way back in Mr. Peabody's Wayback Machine, for anybody who knows that reference, to 1MDB. And we had the sentencing of Timothy Leissner. Timothy Leissner was the managing director at Goldman Sachs who facilitated all of the bribery and corruption involved in that huge scandal. And he has been apparently a stellar cooperating witness with the Department of Justice. It's led to the return of billions of dollars to the Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund, 1MDB. And his sentencing was put off 10 times. That's the extent of his cooperation. He asked for probation. The Department of Justice agreed with him. The judge gave him 2 years. And apparently the judge was swayed by a letter from Goldman Sachs that said, essentially, one, he's never shown remorse, and two, he was the guy that led it. If it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't have gone down this rabbit hole. We went down that rabbit hole and we paid. So you can't let him go for nothing. And that was persuasive to the court. And he was sentenced to 2 years in jail. I don't think that, well, I know this case is not ended because J. Lo, ultimate perpetrator of this fraud, is still at large, apparently in China. So either he'll be arrested or he'll move on to greener pastures somewhere. But this was a big deal, the Leissner sentencing. And as much as he cooperated, I can't disagree with the court's analysis.
Okay, so you think that they did the right thing in their decision to actually send him to prison despite, as one of the articles said, exemplary cooperation, including not hesitating for a moment to cooperate. That's interesting. Okay. I'm still waiting for that J-Lo movie and not the Jennifer Lopez one, the one that's going to be What's Happened to J-Lo. It's just too good. Maybe he'll get a pardon. I don't know.
Wow. I hadn't even put him on my radar.
Come on, Tom. Let's think about what's
going on. I'm
going
going to put him after
SBF. There we go. All right. I have a number of friends very high up in the compliance industry and some who are not as high up, but they're looking for roles that are in their own market, but there aren't a large number of those roles. And so they want to try to go remote, or at least get the kind of job that lets them show up, say, 1 week a quarter. And that's why I chose this next article that focuses on how remote work is fueling migration trends within the United States. So this comes from Mortgage Point, not usually on our list, but it reviews Howdy's 2025 remote work trends and migration report. And the slogan seems to be, head to Texas, buy a home in the suburbs, then go back to California once you regret your move to Texas. Now, at this very moment, I am in Texas, in Austin, near Tom, kind of, but I'll be going back to California soon. So people have a lot of opinions about both those places. 1 in 5 remote workers are planning to move this year, driven by a mix of a change of scene, cost of living, and the dream of buying a house. Very difficult sometimes in California, for sure. Suburbs are the big winners, with almost half of movers heading to suburban areas, 29% sticking to urban centers, and 22% looking at the rural life. So interesting, while people are leaving places like Florida, California, and even Texas, they're also flocking to Texas, California, and Florida. So it's this game of musical chairs within the country's coasts and prairies. And according to the survey, 59% of remote workers would take a pay cut to keep that remote flexibility. That's fascinating. And 56% are actually staying in jobs they don't like to keep working remotely. Remote work is also changing what we want in our homes. So more people want dedicated home offices, quiet spaces, or just plain more room. and a third have already invested in home office upgrades. I actually thought that was low. This resonates with me. So when we bought our house in Southern California 4 years ago, the first thing we did was build an office where there used to be an open second-story balcony space. But going back to compliance officers who want to stay remote or work in environments with fewer options, Tom, what would be your advice to those industry professionals who want to move up or move on, but there isn't a local role?
Well, that's a great point about potentially moving up the ladder by taking something remotely. And that's certainly a valid reason to do. I moved out to the country in 21 when my wife's job went 100% remote because we could. And her job is still remote. And so we still live here. And we were very happy with our move. I think, though, for those who want to achieve the highest levels within our profession, they're going to have to be at an office, and they're going to have to be with other C-suite members, and it's not just looking up, it's looking 360 degrees, because as a chief compliance officer or second in command, you need to be seen. And I have a friend named Louis Sapperman who always talked about planes, trains, and automobiles because he believed in getting out of the office and getting into the field. And I think we're going to see a return to that because I don't think you can create the personal connections you can virtually without going out to meet people in the field. And I'm consulting with a large energy service company where they just had a huge code of conduct and hotline rollout but they did it. They went to literally offices on every continent. And I think even they were surprised because about 3/4 of the comments were, wow, no one from compliance has ever come to see us before.
You showed up.
You showed up. And I used to say that was important from the legal department. It's even more important for compliance. I do think if you want to achieve a CCO level in our profession, you're going to have to go out to wherever your company is headquartered. Maybe you could do it 2 weeks a month. I'm not sure a quarter of the time. One week a month is enough because you have to have the personal relationships with your other C-suite and board members. But if you're not the chief, you're doing third-party due diligence, I see no reason you need to be in a corporate office.
There we go. Why don't you break my heart, Tom, and talk about the Uyghurs and what is happening in China?
So anyone who had thought about this would have figured out what the Chinese did, and is they just force marched the Uyghurs across all of China so that Uyghurs are not only working on products in Xinjiang, they're working on products literally across China. And really no surprise to the Chinese response. What this does for companies trying to stay in compliance, though, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this, Kristy, because, how many Uyghurs invoke the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act? Is it one? Is it half of your product is made by Uyghurs? How will you ever find out that Uyghurs are involved in the construction and they were forced labor if you bought a project in Canton province? I just don't have good answers for any of those questions. It's going to be a huge problem. I don't know how the government's going to try to enforce it, because certainly the Chinese are not going to say made with 3% Uyghur forced labor. You're right, it's just terrible.
So the New York Times piece was fascinating because it's the first really big public expose that I have seen naming names. They named very large companies and said, hey, this is what's happening. And I even had pictures of some of their logos within the photos. So we have this proof now. Savvy listeners of the podcast will remember that last year there was a Senate committee hearing where people who know were talking about the fact that Uyghurs are being forced to other provinces. And that's partially in order to avoid UFLPA, right? The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, where there is a presumption that goods made in that region are made with forced labor. And the minute you start moving those folks inland, which is what's happening, it is incredibly difficult to track, but also it becomes a political boon potentially if we're talking about tariff wars and we're talking about the expansion potentially of the UFLPA to other parts of China. I think this is something compliance officers haven't paid enough attention to. I get on my soapbox again, and need to, because this fallout from a supply chain perspective, especially with the current politics, could be absolutely incredible. And we need to be prepared for what happens next.
It's, yeah, whatever that may be.
Whatever it may be. Well, okay, Tom. We mentioned Texas and California in my last article, but I also mentioned the Sunshine State. So let's bring it home with the latest tales of our beloved Florida woman. This Florida woman is 18-year-old Evelina Fabianski, and her story was so good, it was actually featured in The Independent in the UK, as well as the New York Post and all the other places you find great Florida women's stories. So Miss Fabianski was out for revenge on her ex, but she may not have hit the target the way she intended to. So she was armed with a can of bright yellow spray paint and eggs, ready to do some serious damage to her ex's car to soothe her achy breaky heart. But there was just one problem. She actually tagged her neighbor's black Infiniti instead. So her alibi may have seemed legitimate until the same yellow spray paint found on her neighbor's car was found on her sweatpants. So the neighbor whose car got the surprise makeover was less than thrilled. He was found scraping paint off with a razor blade, but he told reporters he's holding off on using WD-40 until he can go to court. The flabbergasted deputies who arrested Miss Fabianski and her friend were heard on body cam footage saying, quote, "You guys are god-awful at being sneaky. You painted the wrong damn car," unquote. Ms. Fabianski and her 16-year-old friend racked up a rap sheet of charges, including DUI, underage drinking, and possession of a whole lot of weed. Their neighbor victim had some wise words for Evelina. "You're 18. There's no point in ruining your life over a guy. Makes no sense." Totally agree with that. So let that be a lesson to all you would-be Florida vigilantes. If you're gonna go full Picasso with your ex's ride, double check the license plate first. Even though revenge is a dish best served cold, it's best not served on your neighbor's car, especially not with eggs.
God bless Florida woman.
God bless Florida. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet. Every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.